overcooking vegetables, not to the point where they're just a blitzed, unnutritional mush, but something like a broccoli. Normally you've got a very long stalk and then you've got the floret at the top. So the stalk can come off and you can put that away, and eventually you could blitz that into a smoothie, for example. But just have the broccoli floret, very well cooked. And if you're not allergic to something like sesame, dipping it in hummus or having that option. So everybody's taking, with their fingers, if they like, for a picnic, you're taking the soft broccoli floret and you're able to put it in the hummus. That's vegetables and that's a beneficial fat.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, or again, it's cut strawberries very finely, and you can dip them into yogurt. It doesn't need to be cream or ice cream. It's a textural thing and it's a nutrition thing as well.
So, thank you all of you who have joined us today, and hello and welcome to our latest Unpacking Dementia live session. For those of you who've not joined us before, I'm Ruth and I'm the lead for our dementia support services. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by nutritionist Kate Taylor. Now, with it being Dementia Action Week, that's a national initiative aimed at raising awareness about the condition, and I think it's a really great time to start shining a light on some of the important topics, one of which that comes up a lot on our carer session is eating and drinking for people living with dementia. So let me introduce you to Kate. Kate, tell the viewers a little bit about yourself.
Hello everyone. First of all, thank you for having me, Ruth and Rob and Dementia Adventure. I'm really happy to be here, so thank you very much. So everybody, my name is Kate Taylor. I'm a registered nutritional therapist, and as well as my core nutritional training, I have a specialist qualification in nutritional therapy for dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So my particular passion and specialist training within nutrition is cognitive function, and in the unfortunate case of dementia, cognitive decline.
Brilliant. So we've got some really, really interesting points to talk about today. But before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. Please do feel free to ask us any questions. We will do our best to answer those. But if you do ask a question and we haven't quite got round to it in the session, we will be looking at those after, and I will ensure that we get an answer out to you. As always, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Right at Home for sponsoring our Unpacking Dementia series and making these possible. So let's get started with today's session. And I think one of the places I'd really like to start is what are some of the more common challenges around eating and drinking for people with dementia? Because it's something that crops up so many times on our generalized sessions. So Kate, what in your experience are the more common challenges that people come across?
So, of course, we need our jaws and our teeth to eat. So sometimes, depending on the state of your dentition, both before you were diagnosed with dementia and then as the disease sadly progresses, we have to be careful with how we are able to chew and to swallow and the condition of the teeth that remain in our mouth. So I'm not a formal dentist, but some of the nutritional things that we can do is just make sure that we limit those highly processed, highly sugary foods and drinks. We don't want to be bombarding our teeth with more refined sugar than they need to be. And our teeth might be fragile at this stage, and our chewing might not be, and our mastication might not be as good as it once was. So of course we need to be careful of the texture of our food and very conscious of the mouthfeel.
And just thinking about that high sugar intake, I mean, often people are living with comorbidities such as diabetes type 2, which can all have an impact, can't it? But I know one of the things that we're aware of is dementia impacts the senses. And the way that dementia can progress means often people have a much sweeter tooth, don't they? Particularly when they're heading towards the later stages of dementia. So is there any nutritional advice you could give around somebody who's got a real sweet tooth and all they want to be reaching for is that refined sugar? What are the options around that we could support somebody with?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for example, rather than having a carbonated fizzy drink, which is bad for teeth, but sometimes when the bubbles, you drink it too fast and they kind of go up your nose and the whole thing is just an unpleasant experience. So instead of that, what you could do is just have some water and squeeze a dash of fresh fruit juice in it. So you've got that little bit of sweetness, but you've still got the hydrating element from the water. You could also do smoothies, so you can have a combination of the food. So you get a nice mix between the sweet and the savory. We don't have to load our smoothies with, loads of different fruits and sugary things. We can add a few sort of sneaky vegetables in. You can, if you're in the position where you have a carer, you can blitz in vegetables and things like that, or add in ground up flax seeds or chia seeds. So
Oh, brilliant.
it's just or some add some yogurt, really high protein yogurt or quark. So you're getting that little bit of sweetness, but you're getting a bit of the beneficial fat and the protein from something like quark.
What I love about that, I think, is also making those drinks more interesting because I
Yeah,
know dehydration can be a real concern for
yeah,
people. I mean, I think the reality is none of us probably drink enough, but actually, when that message of thirst doesn't get through to the brain, the likelihood of picking up that drink becomes minimalized. So,
exactly.
actually, if we can make that drink more interesting, that's a great idea. In fact,
Yeah, and
I've had a comment in the chat that I'm just going to pick up with you from
oh,
Nigel, and he said his dad has lost a lot of weight since his dementia has developed, and they've tried multiple strategies to help maintain a healthy weight without making meal times feel pressured, but it's tough. And I think again, there's so much that plays into this, isn't there? There's concerns
yeah.
around forgetting meals if somebody's living independently. And do you have strategies and advice to support somebody there to really encourage somebody to engage in meal times?
Yeah, I mean it's almost back to basics. Your commenter was Nigel, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I don't know how much he is on hand with his father, but I'm a big fan of post-it notes, and you could even have a whiteboard. And Nigel could prepare the whiteboard for his father if his vision is appropriate. So every day he can see, as long as he has one of those clocks. They say the time, but they say the day and the date.
yeah,
So he
yeah.
understands that today is a new day. Just have a schedule, very, very visible, but also, quite subtly unobtrusive. It's quite fun if you walk into a house and there's a whiteboard and post-it notes. So it
You know
doesn't
what? And actually,
feel
on
strange.
equal to that as well, I've worked with lots
Yeah.
of people who use, and I'm really sorry if I set them all off, Alexa and Google
Oh,
Dots, and you can set little reminders. And I know that tech has been really helpful with that because sometimes it's that
yeah,
gentle nudge, particularly if meal times aren't being remembered. But actually, it's not that personal thing. Often, I think the dynamics within dementia create some real challenges. I don't want to be reminded by the person that cares for me. I want to,
yeah.
feel independent. And actually, tech does allow us to do that a little bit as well.
Yeah,
But
and
go
oh,
on.
thank you. Just while we were talking about the drinks, something else. If you did make a smoothie, be it a sweet or a savory smoothie, you could, if a carer or if the person is able enough, if they, batch made soups and smoothies or whatever, they could leave them in different places around the house, maybe in containers with a straw, so that wherever the person walks, there's that visual reminder of, oh, there's my smoothie. And if it's with a straw, retains their dignity, so it's less chance that, they'll spill it or things like
Yeah,
that.
no,
So
that's a
it's,
brilliant idea. No, I really love that. I've also got another question in here about what to do when a person has very limited appetite. And I think certainly as dementia progresses, that can happen more and more. I think really as we grow older, our appetite definitely gets smaller, doesn't it? And our nutritional need, I would imagine, gets smaller because we're probably not as physically active as we may have once been. But is there ways that we can encourage people to eat? Certainly on holidays when I'm supporting those. Meal times are important. They're a real social experience. But what about when we're at home? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. Make it an interactive and fun experience. Obviously, going back to the question earlier, if your inclination was towards a sweet tooth preference, make those meals exciting. They may not be as frequent as they were, in one's earlier life, but when they are scheduled to happen, make them different and the mouth feel good, and something that is appreciated and look forward to and nourishing. That's why adding the beneficial fats and the proteins, making the meals that are eaten very all-encompassing. I would say that that's very important. I mean, Ruth, you have far more experience than me on traveling with people with dementia.
Mm.
So do you know what? Actually, I would bow to your greater experience with that,
I
to
mean,
be
I
honest.
think I know I've certainly worked with a number of people where we've talked about making meals colourful, so visually
Yeah,
appetizing, because often taste can be affected. And when taste starts to be affected, then obviously the appetite is going to go along with that, because if things aren't tasting the same or there's not that drive to want to
yeah.
eat. So I mean, I definitely worked with one lady and she really didn't have much taste left at all, and that was her experience through dementia. So she ate for color. Now she did have insight to know, actually I've lost a lot of weight, I really need to be thinking about my diet. So in order to get the nutrients into her, day-to-day meals, she actually would prepare things like really brightly colored salads, so visually for her it became more interesting.
That's a great idea. And texture, we forget because we're so busy, and we often forget to chew our food. And obviously in dementia, that's another obstacle. But yes, like you said, color, texture, mouth feel, visually, or even the containers that you eat them from.
And
Um,
that actually comes nicely onto another question about, do we recommend specialized cutlery? I think the reality is that my
mm,
finding is there is so much on the market out there. One of the things that we're often asked about is, certain plates, colors of plates. And I know the recommendation or the research suggests that red or blue plates are a good option because they provide that contrast. Um,
mm.
in my experience, I wouldn't recommend specialized cutlery unless it was beneficial. But I mean, that's sort of real surface level for me. Kate, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, knives are the ones you have to be very careful, but these are mature, sophisticated people, who have to happen to have a cognitive decline condition. So you don't want to belittle or patronize, things like children's cutlery, but,
Mm.
where possible, prepare meals where you can eat with a spoon instead. Again, yogurt or something like a, nice porridge, chia pudding, things that are very soft on the palate, but that you can eat with cutlery that isn't going to be perhaps
So
an
soups as well could be
elevated
helpful.
like risk. Yeah. I would say where you can aim for a fork and a spoon rather than anything that needs, a knife to cut it. Or
Okay.
if you live with a carer, could the carer perhaps, if you want a nice piece of meat because you enjoy it, you like the smell, you like the preparation, it's nutritious enough, particularly as, I mean, I mentioned meat, but fish. If a fish is flaky, you can eat it with a fork. You don't need a knife.
Yeah, no,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
And actually, that brings me on to the next area I'd really like to talk to you about, because I think thankfully we've finally had a little bit of summer. I don't know where you are, but we've had some lovely sunshine down here in Essex, and it has meant getting outdoors and eating outdoors. Now, often, I know we talk about picnicking, but it's such a good sensory experience, isn't it? And we start to really, really enjoy getting out, spending time with family, barbecues, that kind of thing. Do you have any tips about how we can really encourage somebody living with dementia to join in that experience, or what kind of foods might be helpful to encourage that?
Yeah, interesting question. And it's fascinating, and it's quite reassuring that you mentioned the senses and how important they are, because it's often an overlooked sign. Our
Mm.
senses start to go and we wonder what's happening, and it's actually one of the early stage indicators of cognitive decline. So do I have any tips for getting outdoors and picnicking? First and foremost, make sure that flies and wasps are kept as clear of the food as clear away from the food as possible. You do not want that scenario where somebody picks up a plum and there's a wasp on it, and they no, don't do that. So I would say be careful of insects. um Again, food hygiene is very nice, but I would say try in company. Yeah, make sure the area is comfortable. If the sun is beating down, it will be incredibly important to provide some shade. Yeah, the group dynamic socializing is a great part of cognitive stimulation.
I
Um,
think what I love about eating
yeah,
outside is the opportunity it gives us to really all enjoy food together.
yeah,
So like finger foods,
yeah.
making sandwiches a little bit more intriguing. Cut off those crusts. I know there's wastage, but they do
Oh,
look
I love the
pretty,
crust. It's so good.
I understand the benefit, but making things look pretty can be really
Yeah,
nice. But enjoying that intergenerational meal time as
yeah,
well. But I
yeah,
think when we start to do that, I know when we're away, we do lots of almost modeling behaviour, for want of a better word, where struggling to get people to drink. We all have an extra drink outside, and oh, I'm really thirsty, or it's really warm. Do you know what I mean? So rather than saying, oh, you need to drink more, or
yeah, the cues and
yeah, and I
yeah,
think actually when it comes from everybody enjoying that experience, somebody living with dementia, in my experience, has been much more likely to join in with the group, rather than kind of it feeling like, oh, actually I'm being told I need another drink, which can be really frustrated. Would you
yeah.
agree?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, 100%. That's such a nice way to approach it. And you talk about modeling behavior. I mean, if somebody has been able to prepare food beforehand, something like, overcooking vegetables, not to the point where they're just a blitzed, unnutritional mush,
Mm,
but something like a broccoli. Normally, you've got a very long stalk, and then you've got the floret at the top. So the stalk can come off, and you can put that away, and eventually you could blitz that into a smoothie, for example. But just have the broccoli floret, very well cooked. And if you're not allergic to something like sesame, dipping it in hummus or having that option. So everybody's taking, with their fingers, if they like for a picnic, you're taking the soft broccoli floret and you're able to put it in the hummus. That's vegetables and that's a beneficial fat.
mm,
Um, so
absolutely.
yeah, or again, it's cut strawberries very finely, and you can dip them into yogurt. It doesn't need to be cream or ice cream. It's a textural thing and it's a nutrition thing as well. So
Definitely.
yes,
And Nikki's asked us, can eating outside improve appetites? Absolutely. So there's lots of research out there around getting outdoors is being, good for all of us. But actually, at Dementia Adventure, some time ago now, we did a piece of research with Natural England. And one part of that research found that actually eating and sleeping patterns are improved when we get outdoors. So basically, when we go outside, it really starts to balance our circadian rhythms, which is our
yeah.
natural alignment with eating, sleeping, etc. So yeah, it really, really can improve appetite because we're getting outside, definitely. But it can also we can use that encouragement planting food, using the garden to have like small vegetable patch. I've got a pear tree in my garden now. I don't love the pears, but actually it does mean we do lots with them when they've
Yeah,
harvested. And again, it's something we really encourage people to do because it's
yeah.
giving a little bit of meaning and purpose. It gives some value
Exactly.
to a meal when often that enjoyment of food has started to change. So actually growing, prepping can be a way of
Yeah,
encouraging, I
you've grown.
found.
It's like part of you. It's your hard work gone into it. And Ruth, that's so interesting. You spoke about the circadian rhythm because for maybe in dementia is a little bit different, but there's a lot of research to suggest that the morning light, so getting up within the first hour of you waking, that's the most beneficial to help you then sleep at night. And it's to do with the circadian rhythm, aligning it and checking in basically with what we're essentially built to do. And actually, our gut microbiome, they also have a circadian rhythm and they are synergistic to us. So they will learn our circadian rhythm and they will adapt. So that will help digestion. And yes, there's all sorts of ripple effects to that. So that's a really good point.
So would you say then that it's beneficial to keep familiar routines for somebody when
Yes.
they're living with cognitive decline around
Yes, I really
eating?
would. Yeah, I mean it will, I mean, even without cognitive decline, it's very beneficial. But yes, it's the benefits are heightened or amplified, I would say, with for many reasons, when you have dementia, yes.
And what about if somebody is struggling with, sitting down for those 3 meals a day? What's your thoughts on snacking sort of small and often throughout the day? I know there's lots of sort of information out there about different ways that we eat, what's good for us and what isn't. But actually, when it comes to living with dementia, if somebody really is struggling to eat a meal and actually that's just too much, would you recommend snacking little and often throughout a day?
It's so individual. And again, it will be down to people's comorbidities, as you mentioned earlier, and just their digestive hygiene.
Mm.
Um, I quite like the smoothie idea, just having something, on the corner of a table or a desk or, visually in lots of different rooms. There's nothing wrong with eating little and often, just as there's nothing wrong with eating three regimented meals a day. Generally speaking, it's encouraged not to eat too close to when you then, lie horizontally to go to bed. But dementia is very complex and it has to be supported on a one-to-one basis. So I have no problem with little and often, but I also have no problem with three meals and no snacking. So it's totally individual.
Yeah, and I think sometimes there's some real challenges around eating inappropriate items. And is there advice and tips we can do with regards to that? I know we've had quite a personal question asked on the chat, and I will absolutely redirect to that later on after the session. But is there things we can do to discourage somebody from eating something that may not be appropriate?
Well, if they get somebody to do their shopping, just don't have it in the house.
Sure.
I mean, if what you were referencing was just, the foods which aren't optimally healthy for us, that's fine. But if it's something a little bit more serious, that perhaps, oh, there's a condition where sometimes people get cravings for almost inedible items.
Mm,
In all honesty, in my professional experience, I have not come across that. The
okay.
sweet tooth, yes, and there are strategies that you can put in place. So I couldn't comment on that bit. I mean, but the easiest thing is just try and minimize having it available or don't. But then if you do, and if there's the possibility, if there's, a carer present for a lot of the time, make it a special time in the day. So you know that 12 o'clock is going to be the Bourneville chocolate bar time, or my grandparents of that generation, they used to like black magic. So at a certain time, they would have their few bits of black magic chocolate and they would really enjoy it and they would appreciate it. So rather than having that like incessant craving, make an event of it. So
Okie dokie.
because denial can be a bit mixed.
Yeah.
It can trigger greater
And I think it's
craving.
it's the lesser of two evils, isn't it? And managing,
Yeah,
ultimately, if somebody is just craving sweet things, then, if we deny it, that craving will only
yeah,
increase.
and
But it is
yeah,
managing it like we started, really, isn't it?
yeah.
With, doing those little techniques where we can add some sweet things. But again, there's a real place for having that piece of cake, having that chocolate, and still having that enjoyment as
Yeah, and
well.
the other meals they can be nourishing. Some of the veg like peas, mushy peas, they're very sweet. To the taste. So you can kind of compromise and make clever substitutions if somebody really does have that sweet tooth. I
Sure.
have to say, I know I'm a nutritionist, but I held my hand up. I am more sweet-toothed than I am savory.
I think that's the case for a lot of us. And finally, I'm going to ask one more question.
Yeah.
So, are there particular vitamins that, as a carer, I should pay closer attention to? And do you recommend any supplementation?
Oh, wow. So people always ask me this, and yes, there certainly are. However, without having a kind of a case history, I would have to be very careful about the supplements that I recommend because it's a term called contraindication. So I always need to know the medications and the lifestyle that my client leads and the medications they are taking before I go down the supplement route because I need to check that they wouldn't interfere or interact with
Yeah.
anything else in their life. So there definitely are, but it would need a bit of one-to-one time for me to really check, the supplements I recommend would be appropriate for that
And I
person.
think really that brings me to quite an important point that, this has been a really lovely conversation and quite a generalized conversation about, the benefits of eating, drinking, hydration. But actually, if there is concerns there, we would always recommend reaching out, speaking to a GP. For
Yeah.
some people, it would be input from a speech and language therapist if there's concerns around swallowing. So, certainly please do take what you can from today's session. And we hope that it's really helpful around, hydration and different meal ideas. But if
Yeah.
there is something deeper than that, we would absolutely be recommending that input from GP support.
Yeah, and also as a nutritionist, my mantra is food first. So, as much as you can, avoid the processed and the ultra processed food, focus on the fresh foods. They are so complex and so nourishing, and they contain so many nutrients all in like a beautiful synergistic combination.
Mm.
So, that's one of the first and best pieces of advice I could possibly recommend to anybody, let alone somebody with dementia.
And before I start to wrap this session up, because I think we could talk about this all day without a doubt, the one final question from Linda in the chat, and she's asked, what would you suggest when somebody forgets to eat, but they think they have? And, certainly for me running the Understanding Dementia Better sessions, that crops up really regularly. And what can we do? Again, I'm going to go back to having those timetables, to having those reminders. It's about that check-in, looking for packages, particularly if you're going in as a carer. So not everybody's sort of got that carer on site or living with them, and just seeing what that is there. But as a nutritionist, do you have any particular advice around how we can encourage somebody or, support them to support somebody when that happens?
Yeah, oh, I mean, it's so difficult, isn't it? Particularly if you don't have that round the clock care. If there is a carer coming in, you could always chat to your client. Oh, what did you have? And what was different, or what did you combine it with? Just so it's not accusing them, it's just having a chat around what they think they had. And if they start to stumble, just say, oh, okay. And then maybe exactly like you said earlier, Ruth, about, leading by example, you can take something out of your bag and, start to eat or drink it and then say, oh, would you like a bit as well?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I know I've worked with people in the past, and one thing that we have had to do is add additional nutrients to food when we know
okay,
somebody's definitely not eating.
yeah, okay,
What we don't want to do is get into a battle. And, I know you
yeah,
haven't, oh, yes, I have, because it's not helpful for anybody. But we did little things like we would make porridge with full fat cream. It's not one I would recommend for everybody, and it tasted amazing. But it just meant we knew there was additional calories going in, because
yeah,
actually the reality was we couldn't get that person to necessarily eat when we needed them
yeah.
to.
Well,
And so,
again, yeah.
sometimes it's thinking outside that box. But again, I would be, if it's coming, and that's happening a lot, I would absolutely be getting some further support from a GP or an Admiral nurse as well. I'm going to briefly mention the Admiral nurse service with regards to that, because they are qualified dementia specialist nurses. And if it is something more medical, they're the people to ask. So,
Yeah, or again, a dollop of yogurt. The
yeah.
full fat yogurt, so you don't necessarily need to go down the cream because, not, not it's not the most nutritious thing, but yeah, I get it. Add those beneficial nutrients, or add a little drizzle of extra virgin olive oil, to any vegetables, or even into a smoothie. It doesn't matter, does it? It's just adding those small things, which
Absolutely.
are synergistically and holistically beneficial.
Brilliant. Well, I'm going to bring today's session to a close. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to you talk about this. I really could listen all day. And I want to thank everybody who has joined us. Now, as we started with today's session, if you've popped a question in the chat and we haven't got round to it, we will be answering those later on. I'd also like to direct you to Kate's website, which is Eat, Drink and Think Nutrition. And there's a wealth of information on there for you to have a look at. Now, this will be a recorded session as well, which you can access on our YouTube channel. And we will be back again next month, unpacking change and travel. So thank you all of us for joining us. Thank you so much, Kate, for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And hopefully we'll see you again next time. Thank you all very much.